Alright, so we're holding Hilchos Basar בחלב. We're beginning Siman Tzadik days. And as the saying in English goes, now we're going to get into the meat of the thing.
The milk.
Or the milk. But before we get into Tzadik Beis, just a couple of nekudas to review of the end of Tzadik Aleph that maybe were not so clear. I did double check. We do hold, Ilan, that
Yes.
the shear of Achila and the shear of Bishul and Basar b'chalav are the same. To over minatori, it's a kazais.
Achila
And Bishul.
Bishul.
In order to be over on the lav minatora,
To be over or to be liable for punishment?
okay.
No.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Right.
When it's
No,
over,
in other words,
liable for punishment.
right. Obviously, the one that applies the punishment. Right.
So it's over, you'd be also
Sure. There is a chati shear, sure.
Yes.
But it's kazais for both. Yeah.
The shear would be
We discussed that. Just I wanted to
yeah.
double check everything. Like you said, there is a difference between punishment and what would be asur lechatchila anyway. All right. Now, one of the last seifim of Tzadik Aleph, we discussed a situation where you have a basar tzli that apparently, according to some shittas at least, who said it's a big machlokes, somehow would make the situation very different. Because the basar tzli, or ofui, or mevushal, it's no longer high, therefore it absorbs. Somehow this piece of meat has an easier time absorbing.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Right.
Because you related to it before, now I realize it.
Yes.
Actually, might put a different one. Where the bittul helps by bishul as well. Bishul is not an in of tam.
Right, I understand.
So
You
it's a
touched on
different
that. That was something else. Yeah. So we said that the tzli or ofui or mevushal piece of meat would have an easier time absorbing, according to some shittas, from the milk that it's falling into. And the question is, of course, how much? So the mechaber's example was only of tzli roiseach. Tzli roiseach means a roasted piece of meat that is hot. So from these words, we assume that mechaber does not hold that tzli that is not roiseach would be such a big problem, right? Because he's choosing to tell us. We went over the machlokes between the various shittas as to what does tzli mean, and does it make a difference if it's tzli, or does it make a difference if it's metubal, if it's spiced up? Because then the meat apparently is softened. But mechaber, having chosen to say aval tzli roiseach shenochal lemeliach, that fell into something that is salted, afilu necha machmas mocha boi klipa. Even if it's something which is edible with the amount of salt that it has on it, it's not very, very salty. It would still require klipa, and the Shach says, "What's the big chiddush over here? Even if it's totally tzoinen, even if it's, no melech at all, something hot falling into something cold. There's a din of tato gavar. The bottom one in this case is cold. Then the top one would require, regardless, it would always require klipa. So what's the exact point over here of telling us afilu nechal machmas molchoi? It's a good point. Shach doesn't seem to make too much of it, other than to say kol shekain. In other words, if it's, not salted, regardless. But there could be a little bit of a difference. And that's where the Taz, we mentioned the Taz about two types of hefsed meruba. If something was a little bit salty, remember? Salted just as much as it would be required for tzli. That the Ramah says that in a hefsed meruba that would be okay. That we won't treat it as though it's really, really salted. That was one kind of hefsed meruba. And the other hefsed meruba that the Taz spoke about, let me see if I found it here. Yeah. In other words, the second hefsed meruba was that if it's tzli tzoinen, and if it's tzli cold, that we would be soimer that according to the shittas that it's not a problem, at least by hefsed meruba. So the Taz was the one that said that if you had both situations, that you had tzli tzoinen and you had a little bit of salt, that you wouldn't say that the hefsed meruba is acceptable, because you have two hefsed merubas. In other words, Ramah talks about those two situations as the hefsed meruba, they would be okay. We wouldn't be machmir.
So, situation?
One is by tzli tzoinen. Right.
So even though the meat has been made softer through roasting,
Right.
since it is cold, b'di'evet, you won't be allowed to eat it, is it?
Not b'di'evet, behefsa meruba.
I'm sorry,
Right.
who is it b'di'evet?
Yes, but it's only it's a specific
It's
one,
a particular
right?
one. And you'd have to wash it off, of course.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And the other day he says the hochadein leso beyesh bekoyim ela betzli roiseach dafka. Anyway, so based on this task that he mentions that the little bit of salt sometimes can make a difference, and we hold like the Ramah, it appears to be that there would be some shitas that would hold that the mechaber's case does make a difference, because this case does resemble the case of the Gemara of Kutach, and Kutach is a little bit salty, and perhaps when something is a tzli and does fall into something that is a little salty, that's where the problem begins. But if that Kutach would not be salty at all, and it would be completely tzoinen, then there shouldn't be a problem at all. Now, the Mechaber's case would always be a problem because he uses tzli roiteach as an example. So there would be tator govar, meaning that the top one being hot, the bottom one being cold, there would always be a klipa. So what's the chidush here? The chidush is either, as we said before, that even though it falls into something soft, sour cream, in other words, and it may be covered up a little bit, and we would think it's tator govar the other way around, in other words, the hot is now underneath the cold, Kamash Melan, that no, it still requires a klipa, and in some ways you can say that would be a kula, if anything, based on that chidush. Or there are some shitas, by the way, that would say that if it is a little bit salted, it would be a kedei netila and not a kedei klipa. It's more machmir. In other words, all I wanted to add is that apparently there are some, and we understand that from the Taz too, that the little bit of salt does create a little bit of a different kind of a situation than your ordinary hot into cold. Because otherwise, hot into cold is tator govar. I mean, it's kedei klipa. We understand that. But the Shach is right. I mean, what is he doing telling us afilu nechal machmas molchoi? So obviously, the Mechaber wants to tell us that nevertheless, he holds that it would still be a klipa, not more. It would not be kedei netila. And neither would it be a problem, if you thought it was, that the fact that it may be covered up in the bottom with a little bit of cheese or whatever, it still remains top versus bottom on a tator govar situation. Just because it's now sitting covered up with milk does not make it more chomer than if it's coming on top directly. Okay, so these were some of the nekudas that we needed to clarify towards the end of Tzadik Aleph. Otherwise, the Mechaber is clear. He goes with the shita that holds that the main problem is when you have tzli roiseach coming down and not just plain tzli. Unless, of course, it has bekoyim, which he says himself. Or if it's metubel, that's a whole different case. But even in that, it has to be a tzli roiteach too. That together with bekoyim and metubel, as opposed to other shitas who hold even if it would be cold, if they had bekoyim and metubel. All right, so these are the various shitas. All right, we're going into Tzadik Beis now. Tzadik Beis dinim im nofal cholav lekderesh Basar. Now we're getting involved in very common, more common situations of mixtures of basar b'cholav, problems that can present themselves in the kitchen. And the same is true with Siman Tzadik Gimel and Tzadik Daled, and the other Simanim somewhat as well. So these are very important Simanim. Quick introduction. A piece of meat falling into a gdera of melichix, milk or melichix, can pose two different kinds of problems. In other words, there are two situations where the chalav, where the dairy pot, can become potentially, also, I say potential because of course you can always maybe have bittul. Potentially a piece of meat fell in, of course by mistake, into this pot. Now what? Well, the first possibility is that the basar is emitting its own tam into the melicha dish. That would create a problem of basar mecholav in Torah. Right? We would have a problem here of the tam of the basar going into the cholav. What's the second problem? The second problem is not so apparent. A balabasta would not even think of it. She removed the meat right away. or within a few seconds. The milk that was absorbed into the meat could have come back into the milk and make the milk asur midrabanan. You're talking about a situation where you require shishin. Because roiv you have, it's min b'minoi.
Min b'minoi.
Right, and we hold min b'minoi is batal b'roiv. So the whole
Midaraisa.
question, right, midaraisa. So the question would be, it's a machlokes. We don't hold like the sheet in the Gemara where it's also the mashu min b'minoi.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we hold min b'minoi is batal b'roiv, right? So here it would be a question in a derabbanan, supposedly, right? Yeah. So therefore, in this case, of course, if you have shishim, it would be mutter. If you don't know if you have shishim, you need shishim against the piece of meat, right? You don't know if you have shishim keneged the chalav that came back out, which is what you really need. If you don't know, that's why most of the time we are meshayr when we calculate. Do I have 60 in this pot? Keneged the piece of meat to fill it. It could be another Isser, right? When we are Meshar Shishim, we can Meshar Keneged the whole piece. Usually, most of the time.
Because we don't know.
Because we don't know.
How much taste from
right.
meat.
How much?
Taste.
Either that, or in this case of the chalav too.
But there we have a different problem because it doesn't depend on.
Yes, it does.
No, even after.
Yeah. Well, later on, you're talking about another pot because of
in this pot. The taste depends on the size of the meat.
Right.
The milk that went into the meat that comes back out, it depends how much went in. Even if let's say as much milk went in and came back out as the size of the meat, and now another drop goes in, that other drop will again answer.
Yeah.
You know why? The chumrah. Because I don't know that the first quantity of milk that went in actually already destroyed the meat's ability to usher something to the degree that it's already exhausted. Yeah, but we are meshayr. We are always meshayr, in this case too, keneged the chatichas basar, not anymore, right? That's the halacha is, as we will soon see. Yeah, the halacha is. No, you'll see. We'll read it inside. Okay, we're going to read it inside. Maybe that was just an opinion that we don't follow. Sure.
Well, there is a question that involves what you're saying. There is a question that involves what you're saying. It was versus. Do we really have only 59, or do we have 60? Because the blias that of the chalav that are in the meat have already become chanan. Right. So we don't use it because the Shita says that you can use everything, including that piece of meat.
But that's something else.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll see it inside. Okay. So these are the two problems: the time of the basar going to the chalav, the time of the chalav that became asur, the chalav that is in the meat coming back out, will also asur the chalav. Now, so let's see the halacha inside, and then we'll explain the various shittas. Seif
on that asur the chalav, the meat we were assuming less than.
No, we're going to read it. We're going to see. Yeah, for sure we're going to learn the halacha. Yeah, let's learn it inside. But these are the two scenarios. These are the two problems that exist with a piece of meat falling into milk. Okay. Now that we know what the problems are, how do we deal with it? Seif Aleph, kazayis basar shenofal letoch yore shel chalav, roteach. Obviously, a piece of meat is falling into a bowl, a pot, a large pot of milk, and it's boiling. All right, now what? Well, we have tam. Tam is fleishitz, it's milachix. So the Mechaber says not to worry yet. Toim oivit kochav makdera. Call Pedro, Pablo, Juan, or Igor, Ilan. No? Hans. Yeah. Call the goy. Call the goy and ask him to be toyim dekdera. All right. Im omar sheyesh bo tam basar. If he says there's a tam basar, asura.
Any stam goy or that would be
Remember, I'm going to give you a little bit of Taaruvot in a minute. what we covered in Taaruvot is a very important shir in Taaruvot about Nemanos. We'll get into that just a little bit.
But for Ashkenazim, it's not.
It is. I'll tell you where. Not a goy. What a Jew.
As far as
No. A Jew can be toyam. I'll tell you when.
But
not basar b'chalav. Yeah. All right.
Oh, sure, Quihen.
Yeah, exactly. You remember very good. Exactly.
Something else.
Yeah, something else. But But the point is te'ima. Can we still rely on te'ima? That was why I told you. That
but I think the Ramah's objection to Gela
was much more to do with the goy. Right. Okay, we'll get to that.
Or was it that we?
His objection is more to goy.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So if the goy says it's okay, I'm sorry. That I feel it. Tam basar asura. It's asur. Im lav muteres. What is he talking about? He's talking dictero right now. If there's no tam in dictero, it's muteres. Afilu bepochos mishishim. Even less than shishim.
Why does he say even less than shishim? The moment it reads,
right,
I would think that the tam in the kedera is no longer relevant. So I have shishim.
Yeah.
So if he said, according to this, what he's saying here, it would sound,
right,
even if I have 60 or 100 and I still feel the tam, then it remains for me.
Exactly.
It would sound according to this.
Since you already mentioned, I'll tell you. The Shach says over here that smashal from the words of the Mechaber that te'ima is always required, even if there is shish.
And not only that, but if he is toyim and he says there is a taste, then the shishim wouldn't help me.
Wouldn't help me, right?
According to this.
According to this.
Yes.
Yeah. And there is a shita like that.
But the Mechaber seems to that.
Yeah.
Is this specific to Basar v'chalab, or would it be also by Taaruvot?
No, it doesn't make a difference. If there's a time, if you still feel the tam, that is one of the shitas by tam ke'ikar. Well, besides the machlokes of tam ke'ikar is the rice or not, that's one of the things that one of the details, one of the clues that we reviewed a little bit in Taaruvos as to what happens if there's still tam. Is it a diluted kind of tam? Remember that? The very, very, that we can ignore? Or no, as long as there's tam, there's tam. We're concerned about the tam.
So here the Mechaber seems to understand that as long as there's time.
Apparently, but not for certain, not 100%. All that I know from the Shach, the Shach seems to be indicating is that the Mechaber would require te'imas kapela even if there is shishim.
But you would only require that.
Yeah. But most likely there wouldn't be a tam.
Right, but you would only require that if there was a tam, it made a difference. If you're going to say when there's shishim, whether there is a tam or not, it's permitted, so why on earth would you require that someone is toyim? There is shishim,
right?
So you can skip it. So if he says no, you still have to be toyim. It seems that
because we don't.
Shishim alone will not.
Shishim alone by itself is only a shear that we say most likely the time, whatever time was there, is batal.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So, yes.
But now, if let's say there isn't a fela, and I'm relying on shishim like the Ramah prescribes,
and the Mechaber would also rely on the shishim in that case.
Yes. And now I do notice that there is a say.
Right.
So then I would have to spit it out right away.
According to some, yes. According to others, perhaps.
According to the Mechaber here.
Yeah. Apparently, yeah.
I'm the taste there.
Exactly.
The question before you started by saying kefela.
Yeah, I'm going to explain what the difference is. Yeah, here he doesn't use the word kefela. Very good point. We'll talk about that briefly. We'll go to Bobby because we went through this a lot in Taaruvot. Also, we'll go through that too. All that we'll do a little refresher from Taaruvot. But anyway, reading just the Mechaber, he tells us that that's the procedure. So in a sense, he's telling us that shishim is not really a requirement. He's being makel here. He is being makel, like the shita that holds shishim is not the requirement as much as te'imas kefela is, because even if you have less than shishim, as long as the kefela says there's no tam, that's okay. Shishim is being conservative.
Everyone is being conservative. It's being makar.
It's being okay.
Everyone agree.
Yeah.
That if a kfela who is reliable, on whom we can rely, say there is no tam that I don't exist.
Exactly.
The Ramah doesn't say that it's not sufficient to establish.
No, of course.
It just says that we can't.
We don't rely on him. Right? That's true. All right. So what if he says there's tam? Asura. If there's no tam, but even if he says there was no tam and everything is mutter, the oisa chaticha is asura. That chaticha remains asura. Okay, if there's no shishim, or if there is even shishim against the chaticha, what sure?
The asur.
No, what if there was shishim? What if there was shishim against?
But it's be'ein.
What if there was shishim against the chaticha?
The chaticha is be'ein.
No, you take out the chaticha.
Yeah, so now you can't eat it?
Why not?
Why you took it out?
Why not? Why not?
It's Hanan.
What? What is that called?
Chatichana is Hanedela. In other words, Chaticha itself is no Basar B'chalav.
Yeah, but there's shishim.
But the Chaticha is, what is shishim? There's shishim in the milk against the Chaticha, you're telling me.
Right.
Shishim in the Chaticha against the milk.
What? There's all kinds of other things in the pot.
And there's shishim against what?
Against the milk.
Oh, against the milk. So
Yeah.
you change the case around.
Yeah.
So if the milk was
Right.
misbuckled, so why should the Chaticha, so you leave the Chaticha in the pot? Why don't you remove the Chaticha? If there's 60 in the pot against the milk, why do you have to remove the Chaticha?
No, the chaticha you always have to remove.
No, if there's 60 in the pot against the milk.
If you see it, remember
If
the
there's
case.
60 in the pot, the Chaticha is not an issue. If there's 60 in the pot against the milk is misbuckled.
Right.
I don't have to remove anything.
No, if it's a dairy piece, if it's a dairy dish, it has all kinds of vegetables and other kinds of food items. You would have to remove the piece of meat if you
Why?
see it. You always
Remove
have
the
to.
milk.
You remove the milk.
The milk is the milk is here. The milk was misbuckled.
Yeah, but no, I'm almost.
The milk
yeah.
can't ask
Use
anything here.
inflation, the milk could
But it's the milk if the pot is no milk.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's a different story.
Anyway, like you said, this is not our example.
No, it's not.
In our example, there's much more milk than there is meat.
Right.
So the meat, regardless, is always going to remain also.
Go ahead.
Right. Now the problem is a little bit differently. The problem is that even if the meat could become mutter, okay, in a situation where the meat could become mutter, there's a din of efshel l'soichto is osur.
Hana,
Okay? And how does that come about, that efshel l'soichto is osur?
can't assure
Yeah.
that really.
No, how does it come about? Where do you have that kind of an example, that efshel l'soichto is osur? Once the piece of meat has become osur for a given moment,
Yeah.
once it has become, a piece of meat has become osur at a given moment, so it's chanan, it cannot become, even if you're mevatel it, to save the rest of the pot, that piece of meat will always remain osur.
Oh, I didn't have the fatality the rest
In other words, even if you have shishim, keneged that piece of meat, which is chanan, which is osur and treif, and you're saving the rest of the pot,
Yes.
it doesn't mean that you canceled out that isser now that
Stuff
is
that you
in the
could
piece
eat
of meat, that you would be able to eat it. That's what I was getting at.
Uh-huh.
In other words, there is a situation where the piece of meat, you would think, well, I have shishim keneged the isser. I have shishim keneged the whole piece that has become usher once upon a time, with blias of cholav in this case. I would say no. I saved the whole pot because of the shishim, but this piece of meat remains usher, even though I have shishim keneged it. I cannot undo an isser. I cannot undo the chanan. That's called efshel l'soichto osur. L'soichto means to squeeze. You cannot squeeze out the isser, even if you have.
But that depends on what's in and not what's around the meat.
Yes.
Because if that meat was hanan, fell
Right.
into a pot with other meat that's not hanan, 60 of that other meat and the vegetables, meat that fell in, and I can't identify which was the hanan meat,
Okay,
it
that's
would be
it.
misbakal.
Yeah, then you have a minoi.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah,
misbakal.
whatever, right? Yes, that's correct. All right. So this halacha so far is relatively easy. If you have shishim, the milk is mutter, the chaticha remains asur. The chaticha is a piece of meat in a whole bunch of milk. Simple. But b'med dvarim amurim, when was all this said? You know, this halacha is b'shekodam v'hoitzi chaticha kodim shetiflot cholav shebala. That's only on condition that you succeeded in removing the piece of meat before it had a chance to be maflit, to expel the milk that it had absorbed. Which means you removed it while this dish was still boiling. You did not remove it at a point in time when this dish was no longer boiling. In other words, the housewife extinguished the fire or lowered the fire. It's no longer boiling. It's just warm.
And the meat is still inside?
Yeah, the meat is still
Then you have the problem.
Oh no, I have the meat. You took it out and it stopped boiling. The Mechaber says no. Then you're in big trouble, because if you took it out before, in other words, what does before mean? The pot was boiling. It fell in. You took it out. A minute later even, but it was boiling. The only problem you have here, and you always have, is the tam of the basar in the challah. Right? That was scenario number one. Halacha number one, problem number one. The tam of the basar in the challah you always have if it's hot. Now, the second problem that we presented, that is a potential problem, is the milk that became asur in the meat coming back in to the rest of the milk, to the rest of the dish. It's going to be a problem. Why is that going to be a problem? Because that is min beminoi. Milk and milk, a kafela won't be able to save the day. A kafela can taste the tam of basar in the dish and tell you, you know what, lady? You're okay, you don't have to worry about this. There's no tam of basar that I can detect. He can only help you if that piece of meat was removed while the dish was still boiling. If that pot is no longer boiling and then the piece of meat is removed, the kafela won't be able to help you. You did not manage to take out the piece of meat until the milk was actually coming back from the meat into the milk. Even though the best chef in the world, the biggest expert, tastes it and says, Ein bo tam klal. There's no time at all, osir. Elim kin yish bo samach, elim kin yish bo shishim, unless there's 60. Why can't the kafelo help you at that time? Because he cannot taste the difference between milk that was osir and milk that is not asr. The milk that went into the meat and now was allowed to come back in, how was it allowed to come back in? Because the pot stopped boiling. So long as the pot is boiling, any tam that is absorbed in the meat does not come back out.
Even after it's boiled for more than 8 minutes?
Yes. It's boiling for 25 minutes. Boiling. The piece of meat has absorbed milk. It's a chiddush, and we'll see why. We will see where we learned it from. It's a toises. It absorbed the milk, but it's boiling. We see the bubbles. That absorption of milk will not come back out so fast. When does the milk possibly begin to come out and become a problem? If the pot stopped boiling. Now it's resting. Any milk that was absorbed in that piece of meat begin to come out. So at this point in time, in other words, the piece of meat is only being taken out later. I took it out, yeah, but it's too late. You took it out when it stopped boiling. Now a goy who has to taste the tam, he can taste the tam of basar, always. Always, he can tell you, listen, there's no tam basar. But you won't be able to taste the tam of the cholov.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
If it boiled forever,
yeah.
At some point the meat lost the capacity to absorb any more meat from being obsolete.
Oh, gewaldig.
At some point.
Gewaldig. You were just mechaven to Rabbeinu Shmuel. We'll talk about it next time, but I'll tell you briefly what he says. There's several shittas in Taisvas, and Rabbeinu Shmuel is the one that holds, the boiling does not help always. If a piece of meat, what the big chiddush is like this. Taisvas tells us in Chulin that the way this works is when food is boiling, meat can absorb, meat cannot expel that which it absorbed. It will expel its own, it will not expel that which it recently absorbed, so long as it's boiling. Comes along Rabbeinu Shmuel there is one case where it will. If it's absorbed to capacity. It is absorbed to capacity, now that it absorbs a little bit more, it will expel it. You hear that? Interesting.
No, I was looking at
yeah.
So then,
what was it?
Rabbeinu Shmuel, if the meat has absorbed to capacity, if it absorbs any more, it will expel it.
Yeah.
amount is reached.
Okay, so the Premier God, we have various places who say we don't know, and then we're going to be machmir in several cases. But Pashup Shat, somehow if you were able to take it out and it was still boiling, you don't have to concern yourself with the milk, the usr milk. You still have to concern yourself with the tam basar, and if the kefela says there's no tam basar, you're fine. We have a Ramah. We don't customarily rely on the tasting of the goy. We always need shishin. Okay, what's going on here? So first, let's understand what this goy is doing over here. Well, we covered that a little somewhat in Hilchos Taaruvot. The big question here is nemonas. The big question. But it's not only nemonas. What is being proposed here is expert skill is an issue here. In other words, it's a necessity. Whereas others tell us it's not so much the expert skill in detecting taste, it's nemonas, plain nemonas. Some say you need both. So there's a shita, like Rashi, that says you need both. You need a goy being Mesiach lefi tumoi and a kafela. Because it's understood from the Mechaber in Taaruvot, and here pretty much too. You don't tell him what this is for. Taste it. Tell us what you think. And by the way, does it have a little bit of a meaty taste? So it's mashma from several shitas, and we won't go through all the shitas, but some shitas, that you need two conditions. You need a goy mesiach lefi tumoi, and you need that goy being a kafela. Kafela means an expert cook, a guy who can detect the tam. Why mesiach lefi tumoi? Because since when do we rely on a goy's edus? Why not?
It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, interesting topic, right? Remember that one now?
Oh yeah.
Because he may be meshaker. He may lie.
Oh, the Rabbi Elyahu Kin says nicer. Yeah. He may want to see you and therefore not tell you.
That's also, yeah, sure. So we definitely, according to most shitas, have a problem of nemanas here. And in order to overcome that problem, if he's mesiach lefi tumoi, which means if he's innocently talking about it, expressing his opinion, not knowing exactly what we need him for, that's called mesiach lefi tumoi, unless you have a better translation of that.
Incidentally
talking about it, right? He doesn't know that we're using his testimony, that we're relying on him, right? Then it would be okay.
Now, I don't remember who it was. Remember who it was? Who was it who said, the Mesiach lefi tumoi, that's where we're holding by we need the testimony, that it's actually a witness testimony. And a boy can't be a witness. But here we're not in a base din. We're not talking about a testimony. We're just listening to his report of what his experience is. It has nothing to do with the...
Why? Because it's a Gilui Milsa.
Gilui
Milsa. Remember?
Gilui Milsa.
This is not a real edus.
Who says that? But we don't pass them like that. Or at least
in some ways it's okay to say that, because in other words, the reason why we could use a goy in this case is because it's not a real edus, it's a Gilui Milsa.
Exactly.
Gilui Milsa means that all he's doing, he's not really giving testimony here, which we would not allow. He's revealing to us a fact.
Yeah.
A revealing of a fact, it's not edus, which is a very interesting point. It's true. There's a lot of truth to that, and you can use it in conjunction with the other shita. The only thing is, what's interesting is the shitas that hold that you need both mesiach lefi tumoi and that he's a kafela. Why do you need both? And on that there's a machlokes. And I don't remember now by heart all the who says what. But some say because it's a problem of the nemanas again. Because nemanas is a problem to trust the goy. In order to trust him, you need both. You need mesiach lefi tumoi and you need kafela.
And then there's also says that it's a contradiction.
And there's those that say no. The reason why we need a kafela here is really because this thing really depends on tam.
Yeah.
This thing really depends on being able to detect the tam. Then why do you need mesiach lefi tumoi? Because of nemanas. Ultimately, you come back to the Niddah. But the Rashba, I believe, is the one that holds either one of the two is okay. Either mesiach lefi tumoi or a kafela. The Mechaber doesn't mention the word kafela. The Rambam doesn't even mention mesiach lefi tumoi. I mean, it's no problem whatsoever.
In Taaruvot or
not the word, not here, not in these cases. No. Or if you look at Tzadik Ches, yitamenu ele kochovim. That's all. That was the question we spoke about. Why doesn't he say? Because he in a sense, is holding more in the mesiach lefi tumoi, even though he doesn't really hold like any shita, because some shitas hold you need both. Some shitas say you need a kafela. Some shitas hold either or, but he doesn't say either this or that. He just says plain his own shita. Just use a goy mesiach lefi tumoi, which is more closer to the Rambam. So anyway, that was a big sugya of how do we actually end up using here a goy. And does the goy have to be a kafela? Can it be just a goy mesiach lefi tumoi? Does he have to be both? Why do we believe him? Why is this an exception? That was in Taaruvot, and I don't think it pays to go back to that whole sugya. But it's an interesting sugya of nemanas. Nemanas means that we really have here a question of how do we rely on the goy's testimony to tell us what he thinks. So, as Ilan pointed out, in the very, very end, ultimately, there is an opinion that this is not even edus. This is Gilui Milsa. All he's doing is revealing a fact. And there are times, by the way, that the Chachamim did rely on goy mesiach lefi tumoi in very, very delicate situations like agunas. I think we discussed that a woman doesn't know anything about her husband. He hasn't come back from Europe, And a guy says, "Oh, by the way, I saw him dead. I recognized his clothing or whatever. He had good Siman, and he was Messiah Lefi Tumoy." In other words, we didn't ask him to come give testimony. So, since Agunas is a very, very big problem, but on the other hand, it's very serious because if she's really an Ashes ish, if she's a married woman and she remarries someone while she's still married, her children are going to be mamzerim. It's a big issue for him, for her, and for the second husband. And if she did in fact marry, when he comes back and appears as cases, there have been cases, she has to divorce both of them. So the Chacham said, you better believe it that she probably investigated and checked it out, and she wouldn't just come and lie about it. But nevertheless, we can't just trust her either. But there are times that we trust circumstantial evidence in the form of goy Messiah Lefi Tumei, times of war. Depend how many days after his death the goy saw him, because there's something called decomposition of the body, depending on the climate and the terrain. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it's slower, but the body is not the same. You can't recognize him as quickly, as easily. So there's a lot of details in going into this, a lot of investigation. And the Chachamim who used to handle this kinds of issues would never rule on their own. They would always, many times they would say, I will only sign my name to it if other Chachamim agree with me, who have reviewed this and agree with me. They didn't want to take complete responsibility themselves. So that's the example of Aguna. But because of this seriousness and the urgency, I should say, of Agunas, they did allow for Messiah Lefi Tumah in certain cases. So here, it's interesting. It is a question, how come we're allowing a goy to taste this pot? Since when do we, rely on him? So, it's not a real testimony, it's a gilui meal. So, or, as other shittas say, we're going to require him to be Messiah Lefi Tumah and to be a kafela, to know what he's talking about. We're not going to just take any Joe from the street. But from the Mechaber, it's mashma that he doesn't really have to be a kafela. Alright. So after reading Sif Aleph, what do we see? We see that the Gemara holds that Te'imas Kafela would help us with trying to figure out if there was a tam basar in the pot. But Legabe, the second tam, the tam of Chalav that was absorbed in the meat, being expelled back into the pot, that is Te'imas Kafela cannot help you, because that's already min b'minoi, and you would not be able to distinguish the flavor, the taste between this chalav and that chalav. Alright, now in Sadik Ches, in Hilchas Taaruvot, we explained that according to the Rambam and the Mechaber, we can still rely on Timas Kapela today. That's his shita. Now there are Sephardim, Chachamim, you will find them many times, the Kaf HaChaim, the Ben Ish Chai, are machmer like the Ramah. In certain cases where the Ramah is machmer. It doesn't mean that everybody's in agreement with them, but at least you should know that sometimes they say, we do what Ashkenazim do in this case too. Even though the Mechaber was lenient, today we're machmer. But we still need to know what the Mechaber is. Obviously, there are complex situations where we can definitely rely on his opinion. After all, this is the foundation of Halacha. The Mechaber put together his opinion from the biggest Rishonim, the Rambam, the Riv, right, the Rosh. So it's definitely a very important opinion. Okay, so even though the Mechaber and the Rambam says we can use a kefela, the halacha, as we learned in Hilchas Taaruvot, was that the Ramah says we don't. And in any case, you're going to always need shishin. How about a Jew? Can a Jew be ever toyim? Well, a Jew cannot be toyim basar b'chalav. What's the advantage of a Jew? Well, a Jew, we wouldn't have the problem of if he's meshaker or not, as much as with the goy. Plus, with kefela, there's another thing. There's a chazaka that the uman doesn't want to be mara nafshe. The chazaka means there's a certain tendency, or what's a better word for chazaka? Not tendency. Predisposition.
In this case, right?
Yeah, where a cook does not want to ruin his reputation. Okay, so with a goy, we can understand why the chachamim required that. With a Jew, we wouldn't even need that, because there's no reason to doubt him. He doesn't have anything to... and therefore, where would it be? Where could you have a te'ima of an Yisrael? Like I mentioned before, if you had Truma, right, and he's a Kohen, And a kohen can taste it if there's truma fell into this mix. And there are other cases, like with snoin, with davar charif. If you want to see if it has a milchik taste to it, or a fleshik taste to it, because it was cut with a knife, a fleshik knife. Right. So these are examples where a te'ima of a Yisrael may be possible.
In other words, before eating from the piece that wasn't cut with that
knife. Comparing, I guess. Comparing with different pieces.
You have to eat from the snon where the knife wasn't used.
Why?
Because then it's aser. If it tastes meat, it's aser. You wasn't allowed to put it in this.
It doesn't have milk and meat.
A flashing knife was used to cut a snow.
A regular. So I'm giving just my own example. My own example right now. I says, oh no, would I be able to cook it? I mean, it doesn't.
Okay, so you want to say if you can do anything, but So if you don't taste milk, you're allowed to cook with the
so that's it. We'll get to that. It's an interesting question. I'm posing that.
It's a problem also with.
But you're right. But the regular case is la'achar ma'isa to see if there was tam. There's another siman later on. With this particular case or halacha of cutting a radish or an onion. By the way, you have to be very careful not to use the wrong knife with this onion that you're going to be putting in the cholent. If you're going to use a dairy knife, you're in trouble. Right? To cut the onion. That's what. Well, ducha the sakina and davar charif. So you have a double whammy. They say in English.
No,
yeah.
Something
like that. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Anyway, it appears from the Shach in Taaruvot that even if there's shishim, according to the Mechaber, you would need a kapela. Just want to double check it real quickly. That's what I recall. Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to go through. It's a long one now. But in Sif Cotton Bays of the Shach, the second Shach of Taaruvot, Siman Tzadik Ches, where it seems to be saying that even if there would be shishim, you would be tasting, you would want the kafel to taste it, and we're not just soymech to say that it's okay, because whatever you can be mevar, you're mevar. That's the way the Shach says.
So then we had also the question: would you have to go as far as go to the next door because the boy is asking? How far do you have to go? If you
how much do you have to be mevar?
So what does it mean you can?
Yeah.
There's someone next door. There's someone across the street.
Right. That was another question. Yeah. How much of an effort do you have to put into it? Yeah. Anyway, the Aruch HaShulchan asks two basic questions here, and I like the way he put it together. I don't know why. Not everybody, thinks it the same. Everybody has a different style of explaining the halacha, of raising different points. So Aruch HaShulchan sometimes has
he's known for that.
Finding a creative angle of attack. And that's what he does over here. He says, wait a minute, I don't understand here. I have two questions, he says. But the Mechaber says, he puts an emphasis that if a piece of meat fell into a dairy pot, the kodam, the silkoi, right, and you removed it on time, he says, why is te'ima good for the milk? Tell the goy, taste that has the tam of basar. Why can't I tell the goy, taste a piece of meat if it has a Melicha taste? I automatically say that the chatichas basar is aser. I'm allowing te'ima, taste. Am I allowing a taster? He's tasting the milk. Does it have a taste of meat? Great! Tell him to taste the piece of meat too. As I'm reviewing the Aruch HaShulchan, I says, oh, good question. Gets you to think. Even though we learned it before, but again, we started learning it again. He says, yeah, good question. Why didn't I think of it right away? What? Moshe?
Some of these cheeses before.
Really? Cheese? Exotic cheeses? Israeli cheeses?
Yeah.
Well, that's maybe because of the spices. Then they can make it taste like anything they want, but it's not real meat. Yes. So you understand the question? First question.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, you're inviting him. Hey, taste the milk. Good, taste the meat too. No. We don't ask him to taste the meat. For some reason, it's also okay. Good question. That's question number one. All right. Now, if it's kodam v'silek, if we're talking about kodam v'silek,
does he have an answer?
Yeah. Oh. Sure. If it's kodam v'silek, if we're talking about a situation where he actually removed the piece of meat while it was boiling, then why do you need te'im at all? What did we say? we said that as long as the food is boiling, the piece of meat cannot expel the tam that it absorbed. Remember? As long as the food is boiling,
Right. Yes.
and he, Baruch Hashem, kodam v'silek the piece,
Right.
he removed the piece of meat that fell in, Baruch Hashem, and we spoke about this detail too, by the way. If it fell in, it was only there for 10 seconds. If it's already very hot and boiling, we answer it. I mean, when something is not boiling, you can get away with it possibly. But when something, or
boiling or absolutely
if it's beginning to become hot, you may be able to get away with it if it was just a second and it came out.
even if it's solid.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I think it was less than Yatzaled's boy. Because once something is Yatzaled's boy, it's a problem if it's ala eish. Remember? Mm-hmm. It's a clear rishon in a sense.
That's what I'm asking.
Essentially. So since you raised it, I recall that it had not gotten to Yatzaled's probably. So we don't have to suspect that the time came out. But once something is hot, who are we to be mechalek? Because we'll see, Pri Megadim very much says that a lot of things we cannot be so precise. We're just machmir. But so the second question is the mechaber's scenario of kodam v'silik, the piece of meat. Then why do we need te'ima? Since we know that as long as the pot is boiling, the piece of meat cannot expel that which was absorbed.
Right, we're talking here about the smelling of the meat. Milk, taste can travel.
What taste?
Meat. Talking about it can't expel the milk that it absorbs. The mamashes. When we say tam ke'ikr.
Right.
When we're worried about the taste of it traveling, not the milk that it absorbed traveling.
Yeah, but remember, you're right. But at face value, if you take the svara that says that as long as the pot is boiling, the meat is not expelling, you don't know what it is expelling.
Plus you don't make that distinction.
We don't make that distinction yet.
Okay.
Just take the svara. Raw svara, we were told, and it's true. We accepted it. Tosfos says that. As long as pot is boiling, the meat does not expel. Okay. So the Rosh Hashanah says, okay, if that's the case, then why would you need te'ima to begin with? If it's kodam v'salak, the piece of meat, while it was boiling. All right, so let's talk about the first question. The first question, the order doesn't make a difference. As far as the Basar, he said, we know the Basar is boileah. We couldn't care less what the guy says, therefore.
That I don't know. I was thinking that, but I refuse to say that. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's an accepted axiom that the meat will absorb regardless.
Yes.
Meat falling into the milk, boiling, hot, the meat is absorbed. This guy can't detect milk. He says, I don't taste anything. Sorry, we don't need you. We know it did.
No, because I think the Shuchan Aruch, in other words, he's saying, I'm not interested here in tam ke'ikr, that I need to identify whether their taste noticeable. What I'm interested here is the mamashes in the milk is in the meat. So whether you can taste the milk or you can't taste the milk doesn't make a difference. I have mamashes of milk. When am I worried about taste? When I don't have mamashes, and now I'm wondering whether there is a tam which would constitute tam ki'ikr as though there was mamashes.
Yeah, but the tam and mamasha wouldn't make a difference.
But here by the meat, since it absorbed mamashes of milk, I don't care. Let's say it's a milk that doesn't have a taste. Once the meat has absorbed the milk, it doesn't taste. No one says meat and milk you can't cook together, the isser, you can't eat meat and milk that was cooked together if you can taste the meat. It doesn't matter if you can taste the milk or not. The milk and the meat joined together through the cooking.
Right.
So it's aser, whether you can taste it or not.
Yeah, but that's even if all the milk came out, but tam remained behind.
Now the tam would be a relevant question.
Right, and now
if it wasn't for Hana.
Right, so we don't care what the guy will tell us as far as the tam.
If
even the tam
Yefshar L'Safto was permitted, was mutter, then I would be worried now about the tam, because then my only problem would be that maybe the tam ke'ikr still asers it.
Right.
But we say Yefshar L'Safto is aser.
Right.
So therefore, it doesn't help me that the milk already went out regarding the meat.
Right.
and I don't need to disturb.
There may still be some left over, maybe
right?
not. Yeah.
And I no, but it's already, the meat became hanan.
It became hanan regardless.
The meat does not convert it back into non-hanan.
Right.
So it doesn't help. It doesn't interest me if there's the meat itself is the issue.
Yes.
It doesn't interest me if there is milk in that meat. The meat itself is not the issue.
Right, but you understand that regardless of what the guy will say,
right.
We know what happened to the piece of meat.
Because the meat itself is the issue.
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
It's deeper than that because the milk is boiling.
Right.
Then already turning in whatever went into the meat to a vapor state, yet we're holding, not mamashes, but we're holding it to a bolaya of even vapor.
Exactly.
If it's not the mamashes.
At one point, at one time, it was boileya.
Milk.
Yeah, milk.
But if the milk was boiling,
yeah.
It's not a liquid that's going in because there's no liquid there to go in.
Of course there is liquid.
No, if it's boiling.
Yeah, but the piece of meat is sitting in the milk, so it's
there is a pot with
soaking in milk.
The milk is
what I'm saying is it's absorbing, constantly absorbing.
Yes, it is. Yes, we're not,
it would be absorbent liquid if it's soaking in milk. Yeah.
The milk is boiling. It only means that it's bubbling.
Bubbling, yeah.
It's in a pot, it's bubbling, and there's a meat piece of
What's
meat
coming
inside.
and what's going up from the top level of the liquid?
What's answering it is the milk that is bubbling.
Where they're eating, the milk is boiling, heated to their gaseous. Despite that, Chazal is telling us that it's boiling.
No, not despite that. It's nothing despite that.
Yeah.
There is real liquid milk in there that's boiling.
Yeah, all of it, it's in a state of...
It's the temperature of this milk is higher than Yad Solid.
Right.
No, Yad Solid is not boiling.
No, I understand that, but Yad Solid would already answer it.
Yeah.
But do we hear we're not talking about Yad Solid?
Yeah, here we're talking about really boiling. Yeah.
And if it was Yad Solid,
why are you confusing?
No, but we need to know that it's boiling because of Kodam Basilek of the Chiddush over here.
That's to permit the milk.
To permit the milk.
But it doesn't help us with
the meat. No,
we're talking about now answering the meat.
Right.
Answering the meat, Yad Solid would already be sufficient.
Would be a problem. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
What was that? Yeah. Anyway, so getting back to the Aruch HaShulchan. So the piece of meat remains aser, regardless of what the guy says. Therefore, we don't ask him. It wouldn't make a difference what he says. It had absorbed, it became aser at one time. Whether it has milk or not doesn't make a difference. Now,
what if I remove the meat while it's yet solidified and hasn't reached yet?
I'm going to get that to that. There's the Orach Chaim wrote a sefer called Pri Toya.
Yeah.
And he talks about it. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So towards the end, I'm going to mention that. Very interesting point. So, second question. The second question was, but wait a minute. We were told, we learned from, Toysis talks about it, that it's so long as the dish is cooking, not just cooking, it's boiling, the basar will not be maflit. And why won't it be maflit? Because it's busy being boileya.
Right.
Right? Just like by Melicha, we said something the opposite. It's busy expelling the blood. It's not necessarily. It will not be absorbed. So there is something like that. Okay.
One-way street.
So if that's the case, that it's a one-way street, then what's the problem? Why do we need a te'ima of a kefela of this chalav to see if there's any tam of basar even, of basar even? So that's what he's referring to, even of basar. So Tosfos says very simple. Or Chashulchan says, well, I'll tell you what Tosfos says. When do we say that something that is boiling will not allow or enable the piece of meat to emit the tam? That's only that which is it's absorbing now, it will not throw back in. That which it has from before, it gives out all the time.
So you're saying that which it had before is being meat?
Yes.
That's what it's already now, it's milk.
Exactly. So when do we say that's svara? That at a time of boiling, something that is cooking inside this in this pot, cannot expel. That is a case of where it has recently absorbed something.
Recently, or it's in the process
It's in the process of absorbing something, and that which it's in the process of absorbing something, it will not return into the pot. When will it return into the pot? When it rests. Once it rests, it subsides, right? The heat is gone, no more boiling. Now the milk comes back out. That's when we were concerned about it, that it was only taken out after it subsided. But so long as it's boiling, any milk being absorbed into the meat will not come back in. That's the svar. But what will come in, and that's where you need the kapela, is a tam, a flavor that was there all along from before, which is the tam basar. It didn't absorb something. It is what it is. It gave off what it is. That does go out during the time of roiseach. That does go into the milk at the time it's boiling.
Question for you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering
But you understand the chiluk here? Yeah. And he,
but
yes.
I'm wondering whether it's actually just confused.
All right.
So we have a pot with meat, so the meat is absorbing the milk, and therefore
the milk
the meat is absorbing the milk.
Right.
And therefore the meat is not giving off any milk.
Right.
The process of absorbing.
That's
the milk.
correct.
Why don't we say the milk is absorbing meat, and therefore there is none of milk going into the meat? Why is it the meat that's doing the absorbing here, and not the milk? We have two actors.
Right.
We have a meat actor and a milk actor. Now
Right.
we're saying the meat is the one that's absorbing.
Right.
Why aren't we saying the milk is the one that's absorbing, and therefore the meat will not? Because the milk is busy absorbing from the meat. Why don't we turn it around? Why is it not the meat that's absorbing?
Well, that's only because of the nature of the milk. If you had two solids, you would be right.
So it was cheese and meat
You would be right.
would be absorbing both.
Right. I mean,
Simultaneously.
you cannot, the swarav you cannot emit or absorb and expel at the same time applies to a solid, not to a liquid.
solid.
Yeah, only to a solid. Because remember, we gave an example of, in Tzadik Aleph, of something that was salty falling into, something that even that was not so salty, falling into salty milk.
Kuta.
Right? That was a problem. Even though, where was it here? In the Ramah. V'hod the Torah maluach v'tomeh tofel shari. Right? The Torah is maluach. The tomeh is the one that's not salted. Is mutter. That's only if the tomeh is yavish. Aval im hu dover tzolul nesar Torah. If that tomeh, even though it's not salted, it's tofel. But if it was liquid, so the Torah which is salted is going to absorb from the liquid.
Okay, so the solid always absorbs the liquid.
Yeah,
That's the answer.
apparently, yeah. All right. Now, the Pri Megadim writes that since we're not baki on when exactly did the Gedera stop becoming boiling, so we have to be choishes in every situation. When did you remove it exactly? Maybe at that point it was already nach. It was not. We're not so baki to be able to make that determination.
When you're removing them, when the meat leaves the milk,
Yes.
its temperature will cool off as you're removing it.
All right.
And milk will be dripping from the meat back into the pot. What about that milk? While the meat is in the pot, the milk is boiling. While the meat is in the pot, the milk is boiling.
Yeah.
So the meat is boiling, it's absorbing, and it can't give off. But once you lift it out of the pot, as it's being lifted and it's already exited the milk that's in the pot, so now there's going to milk be coming out of the meat because it's no longer boiling.
But that's the milk that was from the pot. That's not milk from the
That
meat.
was the milk that went into the meat.
No.
It's coming back
That's
out.
just the milk hanging on the outside of it. It's
Yeah.
not milk in-
Right.
And the milk hanging on the outside is okay.
Yeah,
No.
because that's part of the pot. That's part of the milk in the pot.
And you can't remove
It's not the milk inside.
You can't remove the pot.
It's not
Leave that less.
it's not the milk in the meat that's coming out as you
No.
should. If you take
Sure.
if you take out the piece of meat from the pot, it would be, you're right, there would be all this milk possibly dripping back down that was in the pot, not inside the meat. Yeah, I don't think it should be a problem. Yeah. Anyway, so the Pri Megadim says this case is very similar to the din of Kalim. That by then we also say the same svara, that as long as the Yore, the pot is ritachas, the kli is boileya, ve'eno choizer upoltoi. In other words, what it is boileya, it will not bring out again. But if the bliyas are already in the kli to begin with, those bliyas in the pot, that whatever the bliyas are, isser or chol or whatever, they would come out, even during the time of the resicha. Why? Because those bliyas are like part of the kli itself. They're not a separate entity. And they come out all the time. So in the same way that the basar is spoiled into the chalav, let me correct it for a second. See, in the same way that the basar is spoiled its tam into the chalav, even during the time of the resicha, its own tam, that is exactly what happens in the keli. The tam that was in the keli from before can be niflat miyad, but tam that is being absorbed now into the keli is not just going to come out while it's boiling. In other words, the same way it works with basar, it works with keli. Tam that was there before will come out. tam that is being absorbed right now will not come back out again. And that's important to know because of Hanan, for those who hold the Hanan, especially in the Keli itself. Yeah, it could be a problem. All right, just a very interesting pre-toya that you actually thought about also, is that even though we made the distinction of a pot boiling versus not boiling, in other words, once the pot has calmed down, obviously, even if you take out the piece of meat, it's too late. You can't use a kefela to taste. And no matter what it says, it's only going to help you with the tam of basar. It's not going to help you with the tam of cholov that became basar. So the pre-toya, the Orach Chaim wrote the Sefer pre-toya, says that if the basar fell into the gdera as it was getting hot, before you actually saw the boiling point, it would be boileya and it would be poilet. In the same way as when it already had come down.
So what we're discussing here, according to that,
yes,
would only apply if it fell in after the milk point.
Exactly. Yeah.
At least higher than that. So
which is, I thought, which is a very, very interesting nekuda. I don't know why he's the only one that mentions it, but it's a very important nekuda because he says it would be equivalent to that stage of the cooking process where it's hot, but it's not boiling yet, is equivalent to the stage of when it's no longer boiling. It's still hot, of course, it's subsided. At that point, you don't have the svara that is busy absorbing and it's not expelling. At that point, it can absorb and it can let it out.
Well, that's weird.
Not only that, whatever it absorbed, it will come out right now. From before, that it could not come out yet, and once the bubbles come down, it will expel it.
That's very interesting because I'll tell you what surprises me about
that.
Because I always thought the argument why when it's boiling, it's absorbing it and come out is that prevents it from reading is the fact that it is absorbed. When it's boiling, because it's absorbing, it can't release it.
Right.
As long as it's busy absorbing.
Right.
Now, if we're saying that below the boiling point,
right,
after Yatsolidit, it is absorbing, otherwise it wouldn't have anything to give out.
Right.
And yet it can also give out. What happened to the idea that while it's absorbing, it's busy absorbing and can't give out?
Okay, that's a good question. You understood the question?
Because when it's cooling down, it already absorbed when it was boiling. So now that it's cooling down, it can give out what it absorbed. It doesn't have to be doing both at the same time during the cooling down process.
Yeah.
It already absorbed during the boiling. But here it hasn't boiled yet. So it must be boiling, absorbing and giving off at the same time. I thought the whole point, it's not the magic boiling that prevents it, but it's because it's absorbing due to the boiling that it's prevented from giving off.
Yeah, so the answer is, obviously that's not the...
Or at least the Halacha doesn't hold like that, but maybe they understood and therefore they don't comment on it.
I'm going to look into it, Billy Nader. Good point, but Pashut, even though we did explain as it is absorbing or busy absorbing, like with Melicha and other situations, it is not maflet. The main svara of Tosis, I have to look at it again inside, is that during the process of boiling, it cannot do it. It cannot do it while it's boiling because of what's happening.
Because of the intensity of the heat.
Because of the intensity of the heat, apparently. But Tzarech Iyun, just to double check that, perhaps different opinions would hold differently. And then perhaps that's why they don't comment about this. But the svara is very clear that it's only said when it's boiling. We don't say it when it's not boiling, whether it is about to be, it's just getting hot, or it is calmed down. So the question is, what really is different in the chemistry or in the physics, whatever you want to say, about what's going on in the piece in the pot? Very interesting point. If, however, the piece of meat, of course, is a situation where it's hot, very hot, the kli rishon ala eish, and the fire is not on at all, you would have to be machmir too.
That it is giving off as well.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to be machmir too in that kind of a case. Kli rishon, it's still a kli rishon. Kli rishon is just like in Hilchos Shabbos. What?
The meat fell into the pot
after
the fire was off?
Yeah, you would still have to be concerned with the basar, tam, in the pot, and the milk having come into the meat and come out. In other words, even though the fire is extinguished, because of another din, that it's a kli rishon. And the kli rishon is mebashel, in a sense. Right. Now, as far as mavli and maflit, we had that, of course, with kavush. We had that with kli sheni, the different shitas of how strong is kli sheni. Some say it's not mevashel, some say it's only mavliya, some say, you cannot do mavliya and maflit. Remember all that? So apparently there's different opinions as to the koyach, the strength of a certain level of heat. What could it accomplish? And maybe that's the case here. I'm continuing from what you said, that there may be other opinions as to what would be the din as it's getting hot but it's not boiling. Just like it is in other cases of what could it do? What does irui do? What can't it do? Just like by piapua, we have various svoras of how far does the piapua go, depending if it's fat or if it's not fat. So that's something that we need to look into. But Poshet, the Pri Torah tells us that stage of getting hot but not boiling would be equivalent to the stage of when the bubbles have subsided. And of course, then you no longer would have the svara, but it would absorb and it would expel its time. All right, we'll stop over here. We'll continue with Hashem next week.